But knowing this, I just have to think of a way to make low poly look more unique and more to my liking. But with the low poly style, you basically already get the main brushstroke pattern when you first bake the normals. And the final step is of course importing into the king of all game engines, Godot. I still can't control the character, but I will take what I achieved today and call it a win.
The goal in this devlog is to make the character move. And since I have done this a couple of times before, I've learned that going with the traditional character controller that most people show, and even Godot shows, is a big no-no. It's completely fine to use in a smaller scope project, but since I want to go big and go all out, I need a better solution. The problem with traditional controllers is that once you start adding more features, it really starts to crack. If you add just walking, running, jumping, crouching, all really basic things, you will already have probably half a dozen, if not more, if statements running each frame in the physics process. And you don't want that. What you want is to keep it simple. If you think about it, the character can really only be in one of those states at one time. This is where the already famous state machine pattern comes in handy. To explain it simply, there's the state machine with a state property, and it can switch this property like socks when it needs to. So at any given time, there's only one state active. It also lets the state property full control of its update function. So you can make as many of these states as you want and define whatever you want inside them, and then change between based on some conditions like input. This is all very well documented and known, so it wasn't hard to implement. I added 5 states: idle, walk, run, fall, and jump, keeping it simple. While we're at that, time to get rid of this objectively beautiful cylinder and slide in the character from the previous video. Pause. At this point I realized YouTube might not like that the character is naked, so I had to spend some time giving it some clothes. Resume. And here we run into my temporary problem for the next few days: animations. What do you mean, just use the animations tree? Oh my sweet fellow developer. If you ever used the animation tree before for longer than 32 seconds, you will know it's not really a viable option for something more complex. I mean, it's very clunky. For some reason, you can't copy-paste inside it. Working with more than 5 notes at a time makes you question why you never got glasses when you should have. Adding anything more complex than a 3-part combo attack is right here, next to impossible. And don't even get me started on debugging it when something inevitably doesn't work. But thankfully, the animation tree has a little brother named animation player. And what it allows you to do is to play a single animation at a time. And since Godot is cool in that way, you can do this in script. So what we can do is give each one of these states from before an animation property and then update the animation player as we change states. What we get with this is ugly, but nonetheless a step in the right direction. Obviously we need some logic for smooth transitioning, but that can also be very easily added using the already existing code and the documentation for the animation player. So now each state has its own blend time parameter that can be adjusted accordingly. Now there are basically 2 directions I can take: adding extra states or adding IKs, both for more immersive experience. Since I think IKs are a huge topic that deserve their own video, I will move forward with adding extra states. Now just these basic states could be enough, but adding something I like to call transition states can look very good. First I added a state in between starting and stopping movement. These are time states that last a certain amount of time and fit in between idle and walk and run states. So instead of transitioning from idle to walk, for example, the character transitions from idle to start walk, plays that for the given amount of time, and only then transitions to the walk state, and same for the other way around. It's a small detail, but it feels a lot better than just having the 2 states. Next I added 2 extra states, one for landing from a normal small height, and then another one from landing from a bigger higher height. I think 2 of these states are a minimum, and it will be nice to have another one for when the character lands from a you died height. That one could also just play a ragdoll simulation, but we will leave that task for some better times. And while I'm at fixing the jumping, I think it's worth adding extra states for when the player jumps while idling, walking, and running, since these are all very different and the result of blending from a single universal jump animation looks kinda weird. So now instead of having just one jump state, I now have the idle jump, walk jump, and run jump. This will also allow me to control how much of the player jumps depending on the character previous state. Now I thought I was finished with jumping and landing, but I wasn't really happy with how it looked. It was all a bit too continuous and smooth. To combat this, I decided that adding a kind of a time delay to the jump would feel nice. So now the jump state has a property which will allow it to execute code only after a certain time. So now the jump state has a property which will allow it to execute code only after a certain time, which is the length of time from the start of the animation to the part where the character actually jumps off the ground. So the player now jumps only after a small 0.2 second delay. And this is how that looks. A lot better. And if you thought that was all, it never is. I have an issue with how the animations blend, specifically with the legs. Let me show you an example. So when the player tries to jump, it's animated so it jumps from its left leg. The problem occurs when the character is on its right leg when moving, so now we get this weird snapping which doesn't really look good. The obvious fix for this would be to have two variations of each animation, where one starts on the left leg and the other one on the right leg. This is thankfully not a problem since I can do this in Blender easily. The problem is knowing which leg the player currently is on. The only way I think this would work is to have a curve for each animation, making it the same length as the animation, and then depending on where the leg is, the curve a certain value. So I can use 0 for when left leg is on the floor, and 1 when the right leg is on the floor. This will allow me to give each state a function that checks which leg is currently on the floor and then choose an animation based on that. And that should work. Making curves manually is obviously not the quickest approach, but I can always reuse curves since I'm making the animations myself and I always make the animation timings the same. So it shouldn't give me too much trouble. As I've said, the next thing to add would be IKs. The must-have would be foot IKs, and it will be nice to implement a system for the head IKs so I can control where the character looks. But I'll keep that for the next devlog. Until then,